welcome to Future Proof Mzansi, a podcast where we discuss how consumer behavior shapes our marketing plans. I'm Stacy.
And I'm Sena, and we're colleagues at Kantar and your hosts. On this podcast, we interview the most creative minds and innovative thinkers about the many impactful brands in the country and why we love them.
We discuss what makes South Africans tick, why they do the things they do, and what those things are.
And most importantly, through our discussions, we offer practical advice about how to build brands of tomorrow. So I feel like we discussed so much in our previous episode, but only scratched on the surface on the topic of a successful creative.
Yeah, I think there's a ton more to discuss, and there's so many nuances. And many of our listeners will agree that there's no exact formula when it comes to creating a successful ad. It's all about understanding your audience and finding the right balance to ensure we have broad appeal.
That's why in today's episode, we've decided to dive deeper and discuss how people from different demographics consume adverts. Age, socioeconomic status, race, and many other factors all impact the success of an ad, and it's important that marketers know how to speak to these differences.
So you guys will be excited to know that we have invited one of Kantar's best to go deeper with us today. Natalie Botha, I almost called you Nats because we have known each other for so long. You are not only a good friend of mine, but you're a true expert in this field. You come to us with 23 years experience. You've worked in various roles at Kantar, from brand equity through to creative development. And of course, you are notorious for leading our creative and media team here in South Africa before moving to the UK, where you now work within the brand space in financial services.
Natalie, we're thrilled to have you here with your South African colleagues. Thank you for joining us. We have plenty of questions for you, but before we kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, perhaps your favorite career moment thus far?
Oh, thank you very much, Sena and Stacy. It is great to be here. It's awesome to hear the South African accents again. I have missed this a lot. So what's a proudest career moment? I just that's like asking me to choose a favorite song. It's like there's so many moments. I couldn't pin it onto one thing, but my favorite career moments are usually like moments of micro learning. I think COVID's been a big sort of disabler of boardroom conversations that happen after presentations, but often you learn the most when it's the end of the presentation and then you hear all of the detail about what everyone's thinking about and what's going on in the real world of clients and what they're really dealing with. And I love those moments. And then there's other ones that I've had, like working with Google on the language paper and presenting at SAMRA, and there's loads of fun things in the middle. But yeah, those would be a small wrap up of some of my proudest moments.
And I remember, Nats, how excited you were when you went to Cannes.
Oh, yes.
That's got to have been one of your moments. Yeah.
Oh, yes. No, you're right. Yeah. How could I forget that? Yeah, that was a really cool moment. And I think if you ever feel like you are struggling for inspiration and you're looking for that sort of deeper level of inspiration or what's going on in my industry, just take yourself, if you can, go to Cannes, do it.
Sure. Easy said, easy done. Nats, how many years did you work on creative in South Africa?
Oh, geez. So since I started, I literally started and I was in what we called the link department because that's how small it was. We were bringing link from the UK to South Africa. So that was about 23 years ago. And I've always kept it in my realm. So I've moved into brand equity. I worked on the Unilever account for probably close on 10 years. And that was a lot of brand health. And then always navigated back to creative because I loved it so much. But I was grateful to have the brand equity experience because it just makes sense, when you've got the whole journey of creative into brand.
Nat, it's so lovely to have you with us today. In South Africa, the population is really diverse in terms of the socioeconomic status of people, and we find that the way ads are interpreted and understood differs quite a lot amongst these different groups. So Kantar's creative testing solution, which you obviously know very well, called Link, looks at testing ads between the two broad socioeconomic groups. So we speak to what we call the emerging market, which is the old LSM B, and then the developed market, which would be the old LSM A. And it would be really great if you could unpack for us what brands need to consider when targeting against an emerging market with advertising. Tell us a little about how effective ads resonate within this market.
So I think great question. The emerging market, I think, is one that it's difficult because if you look at the South African media landscape and you're advertising, it's difficult to just speak to one. There's often spillover into both, and one will get more than the other depending on how you have sort of decided on where you're going to prioritize your media spend. And so often what we have from global clients coming to South Africa is they go, but I want to speak to everyone. And then they test in both markets, and then inevitably one of the markets will not do as well as the other one. It's difficult to strike this balance between the two. And we often try and challenge our clients to be more specific about where their market is, where their markets are coming from, where their revenue. So in other words, where's your revenue coming from or your volume coming from, where you're going to spend your media target audience, because getting it right is worth it. It's worth getting it right with one market as opposed to doing a diluted job with both. But the challenge is getting it right. And I have seen very few manage to really do it right across both. Usually you will find the bigger brands like the Vodacoms of the world, Cadbury's, Simba, a handful of banks come to mind. So you can do it. The trick with getting it right always, doesn't matter what your situation is the insight right for your campaign? And does it transfer to everybody as a human being? Do we understand the insight behind it? And once the insight's right, generally the campaign will easily flow between, never mind SEMs, but globally, like it's a globally transferable asset, right? I mean, so often the other dynamic we used to face, particularly on Unilever, is you would have an advert, say, coming to you from Singapore, and they wanted to work in 3 African countries. And we've done a lot of work to figure out how transferable advertising is within countries. And it's the same within SEMs in South Africa. So you've always got to think of, when you're considering advertising towards an SEM, what is it that you need to be thinking about? And when you transfer between countries, like a simple thing that you think about is brand status. So like, how is the brand, I'll take Lux as an example. How has the brand Lux done in Kenya? Where is it at in its life stage? And where is it in South Africa? Now just take that brand Lux and use the same thing for an emerging market and a developed market and go, in your household, did you grow up with Sunlight or did you grow up with Lux? And often I have found the differences between the two very often just boil down to brand and how the brand shows up and your experience and history of the brand. So you've got to almost think about it like that's like 2 countries sometimes within one country that you're trying to advertise to.
Thanks, Nat. And from a very practical perspective, are there certain qualities that appeal more to your emerging market versus your developed market? I'm thinking about things like maybe humor or music. Do any of those things feature more prominently for one market?
Yeah, so you will find that at its very basic form, what you're looking for in South African advertising has to be a very simple storyline. And by simple, I mean it's very easy to decode, and it's very easy for me to understand that within what I'm experiencing in this world. Advertising for SEM 2 and 3 often is a source of information and education. And if you're trying to get education or you're trying to get information out of an advert, and the advert is trying to be metaphoric, or it's got layered messages, or it's too complicated for you to interpret, it becomes a source of frustration more than anything. And sometimes you will find, if you look at the SEM, the top SEMs, advertising is a source of entertainment. And yes, education, but it becomes more about looking for some form of entertainment more than anything. And so now you've got this balance between the two, and it's very difficult to create for both. So it's about simplicity of storytelling, and that will transcend both borders. But understanding the nuances between the two is where it sort of really comes to life. Music is a great one, as you mentioned. Music, I have found in Africa in general, is a very powerful tool within advertising. If you segment the link database, you will find that adverts that have well-known soundtracks they will generally be more impactful. Again, this is the whole entertainment factor, right? So you're looking for some kind of entertainment, and music reminds you of something. It's nostalgic, and it will pull you back to a time that you once remembered, and it's got great benefits. Same as using celebrities it has its benefits, and to some generations more than others, but often sometimes celebrities can detract away from your message. So you've got to be super careful to make sure that there's this accurate balance between making sure the celebrity is authentically working for your brand as opposed to it being fabricated or quite fake, because people see through these things quite quickly.
Nats, do you have any advice for us around how we incorporate our brand into when we're speaking to the emerging versus the developed market? Is there any particular formula that works well across both or individually for each?
So including a brand within advertising, if you think of this very simple formula, which is if you had to retell that storyline, would you be able to say it without the brand? And the way we get our agencies or clients to think about it is, what is the most memorable moment of this advert? And if you can replay that memorable moment for me, and within that memorable moment, you find the brand, then you've got a sweet spot. But very often what we do is we prioritize storytelling, and the brand becomes secondary within the storytelling. And a lot of adverts to this day, I would argue probably over 50% of adverts, like half adverts, are epically failing on the ability to drive strong branded content. We've just got to remind ourselves of the way our brains process information. When you walk away from your day today, if you think of your day today, the chances are there will be a few highlights for you from today. And it's the same within advertising. Out of the 30 seconds, the chances are you're only going to remember a handful of seconds. Best within those seconds, we make sure that brand arrives there.
And that's in terms of audiences and our ability through advertising to reflect their reality. Is that something that works, or is it more that people want an escape from their reality?
It's such a good one. And I think there was a piece of work done by Kantar last year on advertising effectiveness. It was the Advertising Effectiveness Awards. And one of their points that they had is what was working well at the time. One of the themes was about escapism. So people were looking for an escape. We've just been through COVID. We've been through sort of these times which have become quite sort of monotonous and repetitive. And they were looking for these escapes. And some of the ads that had done really well across the world. The trick here is that in South Africa, my experience is that escape is quite a difficult one to capture and to do well at. So often in South Africa, you are looking for more like, this is what I am experiencing, and this is how this brand is going to help me and support me. And so it's a fine balance between the two. Like a simple thing. So often we would have adverts that have somebody dreaming, and it's hard for people to transition from real life into a dream within 30 seconds of an advert, because it's difficult. It's not a movie, right? And then they're like, but we were here, now we're here. And it's simple things like that if you're going to do it, that's fine, do it, but do it so well that people really do understand what's going on within the advert. I mean, if I just bring you right back down to like everyday reality and what I've seen in advertising, particularly across Africa, people may have heard me use this example before, but we tested an ad in, I think it was in Kenya. And we started the advert with a Kenyan woman. She was standing in her kitchen and she was washing her clothes in a washing bucket in her kitchen. And the Kenyans just couldn't get past that, because that's not how you do washing in Kenya. So it just shows you that like the reality of my everyday, so like I do my washing in my backyard with my friends, and we are all singing songs, and I don't know. You really do need to deeply understand the exact experience if you're going to reflect it within advertising, because then you're going to stunt them and they're going to be like, well, this doesn't make sense to me because this is not the way I do it. Should I be doing it differently? So it's like that level of reality.
Yeah, I think that's a great example and points to what you said earlier around understanding the consumer perspective. And in this case, it's the consumer reality.
Thanks, Nats. You spoke about the importance of simplicity in storytelling. And so I want to introduce the complex and nuanced landscape of diversity in advertising. Obviously, brands should always strive to accurately represent, the diversity of the consumer landscape when creating ads across races, people with disability, members of the LGBTQIA plus community. But how do brands go about ensuring diversity in adverts, but also accurately portraying people from these underrepresented groups?
There's a tick box, and you can tick your box about, having diversity through gender, disability, race, LGBTQIA, you name it. You can tick boxes. But if you are representing their roles within that advertising poorly, then again, the consumers will fish it out very quickly, and you will be lambasted for it. And not only that, but if you're going to do it, I would ask the client, why are you doing it? And if you are going to do it, you've got to be prepared to die for it, right? So don't do it because you think it's cool, or you think that this is what your consumers are looking for. And there was a classic example that we saw play out in the last year, which was Anheuser-Busch with Bud Light, where we saw, they used transgender women within their advertising, and the conservative consumer, they went quite big on their response. And Anheuser was not willing to die for it. So it was like, that's where it got even worse. So it's just really making sure that it's there for the right, authentic reasons, as opposed to, I'm trying to make money out of this. I mean, I know that sounds cheesy, but it really is about that.
I remember that Dylan Mulvaney controversial ad that Hauser wasn't willing to stand behind. And I guess it leads into my next question, because how do brands toe the line between representing minority groups, which is very important, but also understanding the realities of the overall consumer landscape, and the convictions? How do they marry the two?
So if brands would do the simple maths, and you worked out the percentage of the population that, say, for example, are disabled, and worked out the buying power of the disabled population, you would work out that there is a good reason to make sure that you are representing, largely within your advertising. But not only that, I think the other level comes from, who are you using within your agencies to ensure that it's showing up authentically within your advertising as well? So I'll give you an example. I worked on a brand that was a female brand. So it was a female message. It was in South Africa, and the advertising entire crew, were white males, and it was about safety. You could see how there was a disconnect between the males, and then you had a sort of female brand team, and it was very obvious that you needed the diversity. I'm not suggesting for a second, by the way, that it's impossible that a crew of males couldn't have got it right. But if you want to appreciate the full diversity showing up within your content, as well as feeding into the process, I'm afraid we're going to need the diversity. And it's the same within corporate. The business results have shown for themselves. It's worth getting it right. And how you get it right comes down to absolutely every level. It's not just the advert. It's the people shooting your advert. It's the team you've got behind you, making sure that everybody is representing a point of view that brings a point of differentiation. And then you'll see it start to show up more authentically.
Amazing. So diversity even within the team that starts to conceptualize all of this is key. So we attended an event in Google last year where they showed a recap of all the adverts on YouTube over the year. And one of the things they found was the use of animation when covering potentially difficult or uncomfortable themes like disability. Do you think this is effective, and do audiences respond better to the use of animation for uncomfortable topics?
So I've seen animation used really well for highly technical topics and trying to sort of bring it down to a simple level. Again, it's down to the script and how it's been written, and if it's worth it. I've seen phenomenal things being explained recently that are tough topics, but people bold enough and brave enough to address it. And I don't see why it can't be used, why real human beings can't be used, because again, this goes down to reflecting our reality. So if the reality is that this is what's going on. Why are we using a cartoon to show it, right? But it is an interesting thing, and it has worked. Some brands have used cartoons. I think what you find with cartoons as well is that something that appears to be human but is not is often quite intriguing for the brain. So it does capture your attention. So what you might be finding there is that it does grab your attention. But yeah, I wouldn't shy away from using real humans.
Yeah, thanks, Nat. So we've obviously set the context really well for what matters in advertising. And what I want to do now is take that down quite specifically to what we know drives the metrics that we're all interested in, which is brand growth. According to our Kantar link database, we've seen that including a person from an underrepresented group in an ad in an authentic way has a significant impact on effectiveness. So the metrics that ladder up to driving our brand growth. But we also know equally that if we don't portray them in the right light, that actually it can have the exact opposite effect. So do you feel that holds true in South Africa?
It very much so holds true. It's one of those global truths, I think, is how I would define it.
And what happens when we take it a step further and say that we include mixed race couples or LGBTQIA plus couples? Do audiences respond well to that? We know global audiences do. Is that the same in South Africa?
So what I have found with South Africans is that they respond to the storytelling and the insight and then the characters. I'll use an example. So we get an advert from Singapore and we'd want to test it in South Africa. And often I'd go, I don't think South Africans are going to respond well because these are not, these are Asians. And, my South Africans like to see South Africans. But turns out that particular ad I'm referring to tested the best that I had in a year's worth of ad track data. And the reason? Storytelling was strong. It was a simple story with the brand at its heart, and it was a love story. And South Africans loved it. And it just shows you that it doesn't matter who is in the advert. It is more about is the story beautiful, authentic, and in line with what they hope to see. It is harder because South Africa does tend to be more conservative. But in all the research that I have seen recently in terms of whether somebody is showing up as a member of the LGBTQIA community, often they don't criticize or they won't speak about it in much the same way that they won't bring up race, but they will criticize the storytelling before they criticize the human beings that are in the advert.
I know last year Kantar launched its progressive unstereotype metric within link testing in partnership with the Unstereotype Alliance, and it was a follow-up to the gender unstereotype metric, which had started being included in our link testing in 2019. Could you tell us what the Unstereotype Alliance is, and then also what those metrics entail when we measure advertising these days?
Yeah, so Kantar's got a great relationship with the Unstereotype Alliance, and what they're serving for communities around the world it's all about making sure that media and advertising is devoid of harmful stereotypes. They're doing a lot of work researching how it's going well, where it's going wrong, and how to improve that, and if we're moving the mark on it. So a great organization, great partnership. We partner with them in a way that facilitates on every single advertising test that we do. We ensure that we are checking for that diversity. So we will ask you at the end of every questionnaire, once you have watched an advert, whether you felt that males were represented fairly, females were represented fairly, and that has been expanded now to ensure that races, disabilities, etc. We're covering the full spectrum of making sure that within this content we're looking at are we doing the right thing within our advertising. It's very useful because, as I mentioned to you, often we sit around with our boardroom goggles on, and there are some things that we don't see and that we can't spot. And like I said to you earlier, if you've got a whole, female boardroom, and they won't be able to spot something that's relevant to males and vice versa. So it's important that you've got this last check with consumers, because we've seen a few brands get it very wrong lately.
Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we covered a lot about how to appeal to all audiences and be representative in advertising. And I think there's still plenty more to unpack in future episodes, like looking at how representation matters across different generational groups.
And Nats, before we go, we are starting a tradition where we ask our guests just one question to kind of get a glimpse into what excites them or interests them. And what I'd love to know from your perspective, particularly because you lived in South Africa for so long and you are now in the UK where you're exposed to a lot of the global trends, what sort of trends are you expecting to see in the creative world within the next year?
I can't not speak about AI and what its impact's going to be. I think we would be hard-pressed not to think about how generative AI is going to have an impact on an artist's ability to create. So hopefully we see good progress and hopefully it gets used for the right reasons, is probably what I would hope to see more of in the next year.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Nat, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. For more information, you can follow Insights by Kantar on LinkedIn and X, and we would love to hear from you guys. So please leave us a review, subscribe to our podcast either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts so you never miss an episode, and we will see you next time.